now Kerry Kennedy, who's the Director of Cultural Memory in Syracuse, New York, is going to explore how arts administrators navigate the aesthetics, the underlying messages, and the people who live with images that can be oppressive to them. Kerry, you're on.
Hello, everyone. So what we're going to talk about are how arts administrators navigate oppressive imagery and their messages. We're going to look at specifically right now Confederate monuments, and we're going to look at how those messages are taken. So of course, with a monument, you have the materiality, the physicality being melded with the social and psychological meaning. And Confederate images have had protests against them since the late 1800s when they first went up. But it wasn't until the Black Lives Matter movement and the death of George Floyd protests that finally created the momentum to move them. Next slide. I was having a conversation with colleagues, and Robert E. Lee came up at the statue in Richmond, Virginia, and they asked, oh, well, where are they going to move it? And I said, well, there are plenty of museums and Confederate memorial spaces for them that are private that he could be moved to. And my colleague made the comment, well, it's a shame, you know, it's a beautiful sculpture, its aesthetics really should be made, you know, available to everybody. So we're having the conversation I wanted to have with him because I could not have that conversation then. Of course, monuments present an aesthetic value, but they also serve a political function, and that is to voice the ruling elite's worldview. And it also is a signpost for policies and politics that these images portray. And as arts administrators, we don't think about that background noise or music that's going on when we're having these conversations and how these images can actually affect people. And you're finding yourself having to navigate people's facts and people's feelings, the psychology of feelings, because a lot of people feel like their feelings are facts. And again, as an arts administrator in a meeting, sometimes you're asking yourself, how did this go so wrong so quickly? Again, because you're working with facts and feelings. So the facts here are Confederate memorials celebrate an army that succeeded from the Union, a group of people who wanted to leave for their state's right to continue slavery. And they lost. So, you know, those are kind of some of the facts. And then the feelings come up with pride and things like that, and heritage, and oh, how will we remember our history? Again, these things are tied more to feelings. But anytime you have an attack on the majority's place in society, you're going to get pushback. But often there's a misremembering for how people of color or marginalized communities may see these images. Next slide. So here we have where the majority of these images were concentrated. The Southern Poverty Law Center counted about 1,503, the majority in the South. Virginia has 223. Next slide. And we also look at the timeline of these slides. I was surprised to find that the last of some of these images were still being put up, and the last one I saw was 2015. The change was that though it was going to go on a courthouse, but instead it ended up going onto private property, which again is more appropriate for some of these images. Next slide. So Robert E. Lee is a part of a historic district in Richmond, Virginia on Monument Avenue, and it marks the center of the city. It was developed in the late 1800s by the folks who had profited off of a lot of money that had been gotten during slavery. And so they developed it with mansions and this beautiful 160 kind of Main Street promenade that had different Confederate soldiers: Jeb Stuart, Stonewall Jackson, Jefferson Davis, Matthew Murray, and of course, Robert E. Lee. And to give you a point of scale, in this 160 acres that go up and down the monument, this is a 60-foot base. Robert E. Lee there is 14 feet tall. With the Black Lives Matter protests, Jefferson Davis was actually pulled down by protesters. Next slide. And so the mayor, who was an African American, then decided that all of these Confederate images should be pulled down. All of the statues were pulled down. Next slide. But Robert E. Lee could not be pulled down because the land had been given to the state. And so the governor said, pull it, take it down, let's put it in storage. Well, the heirs who had originally given the land to the state took them to court. And this case is currently in the Supreme Court. So while the arts administrator got to avoid all of that in the city of Richmond, Virginia, and Susan Glasser was very helpful with some background information, when that court case is settled, it will come probably back into her purview. So next slide. And these are just details of how protesters and people who were interested in recontextualizing the space used it. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So what does the community want here? How did they use the space? They used it as memorials. They used it for art and performance in a music venue. They had violin concerts. They used it as a gathering space. They used it for voter registration, protest art, a community garden, and a lending library. And these things are important because this is the voice of the community. Richmond is about 45% African American and 45% white, and the rest are people of color that are there. It wasn't just all African Americans, though, that were recontextualizing the space. So currently, the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts and the Branch Museum of Architecture and Design are both coming up with new design plans. And I hope when they do that, that they definitely take in again, what the people in the community, and they reach all the people in the community, or at least those who are most active in reimagining this space. And again, this is going to be a whole 160-acre spot of what they want to use this space for. Next slide. So lest you Northerners and the rest of you folks think you dodged something here, there are so many points where you could have controversy. So you have pioneers, communists, sexist art, Nazi sympathizers, problematic politicians, celebrities, historical figures. There's religious art and imagery, and even Spanish conquistadors, depending on where you are in the country. Next slide. Monumental considerations is just one of the tools that you can use. And again, this uses and gives you policies, procedures, processes, so that you can have a plan. And with that plan, find your allies, because these are highly political projects and you're going to need political